evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. You're watching Seeing the Unseen with Christopher LaPrath. Tonight, we have a special guest star, neuroscience expert Duncan Hepburn. Now, Duncan is one of the nation's top neuroscientists. He's a proud member and keynote speaker of the Society of Healthcare Innovation. He graduated magna cum laude from the University of British Columbia, top 5 neuroscience, which has a top 5 neuroscience program worldwide. Notably, he developed a groundbreaking treatment that's been adopted by renowned healthcare institutions such as the Mayo Clinic. He's worked with heads of state, Olympians, and thousands of stroke victims. Not to mention countless struggling individuals. Now, before his neurology career, Duncan was a multiple-time national champion and qualified for the 2016 Olympics. His passion for excellence and desire to make a difference are evident in everything he does. Now, for anyone who's out there joining us, please say hi in the chat, whichever platform you're on, so I know you're here. Thanks so much for tuning in, and enjoy the show. Here's Christopher.
It's going to be a great show. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, as Kenan said, whether you're on Twitch, we got Facebook up and running, or you're on YouTube, please say something in the chat so we know you're here. I always start every show with the incense, and the incense has to do with the group card tonight because it's dealing with the unmarked trail. This is giving you blessings, in particular, to let you know and to remind you that the universe always has your back. Now, this card that came up, it just fell out. It's always synchronous. It's always serendipitous. There's always a meaning to it. And I just thought it was really appropriate for tonight's show with Duncan Hepburn, our neuroscientist that's going to be joining us. This card is about having unprecedented experiences, new discoveries, new revelations. And since we're going to be talking, and we've always been talking for the past 2 years or more about spirituality, spiritual experiences, I really wanted to add the aspect of the brain in here because it is our main tool. It is how we function. Both Kenan and I have worked extensively with Duncan and have noticed tremendous results from that. Abby and Marilyn were able to attend a seminar that Duncan helped teach about 1.5 years ago. And so with that in mind, hopefully you'll be able to understand how to use your brain better, how to experience psychic abilities, or even experiencing them without questioning them. So with that, I wanted to bring on Duncan and give us just a moment. Kenan's going to bring him on. And if you have any questions, be sure to write them in the chat. Kenan will be paying attention to the chat tonight. And he'll be able to hopefully answer any of your questions. Also, he's going to post Duncan's website, which is called theneuralproject.com. TheNeural project.com.
All right, so we have Duncan.
Okay, Duncan, welcome to the show. Can you see us? Can you hear us?
Hey guys, I can. Yeah, absolutely. How am I coming through?
Awesome, loud and clear.
Good. Well, welcome to the show. I wanted to, I'm excited. I'm really excited to have you because you have been working with us for a few years now, and you've helped both Kenan and I tremendously. So I want to give a little background. When I first started working with Duncan, is I was with my buddy John, who's on the show tonight, and I'm going to tell this story again. So bear with me for those of you that have been on the show and have heard this story maybe more than twice. but it was a life-turning event for me because I always knew I had these gifts, but I never really questioned them. But this one was so vivid and so startling that's why I decided to go see Duncan. Now, I had sent Duncan a few clients prior to me going to see him because I knew some of these clients needed more brain structure, needed more help. I call it doorknobs. They needed more doorknobs. Is that a good term, Duncan?
I like that one. Yeah.
Okay. They needed more doorknobs to hang their clothes on. In other words, to build the brain, and Duncan will explain that in a minute. And for instance, I'll give you an example. I think I sent a boy who was about 13 years old to you, Duncan, and he was bullied at school. He had failing grades, and within literally a period of 3 to 4 months of working with Duncan, he was class president, one of the most popular kids in the school, and had straight A's. And he ended up going to Australia with his mom. Do you remember that, Duncan?
I do. Yep. Great work. Mm-hmm.
So then, that was just one of my experiences of clients that I had sent to Duncan. And then I went. And I went because I was having dinner with John, and I saw the left side of his head bashed in, and there was blood everywhere. And I asked John, what happened to you? And he goes, well, how do you know about that? Because I don't talk about that, and only my family knows about that. Anyway, it happened about 40 plus years ago. And John, long story short, was hit alongside the head with a tire iron, pretty much left for dead, and he recovered. So John went to go see Duncan, and I thought, that was so vivid for me. It was like it was happening right there at the restaurant. I wanted to go find out what was happening. So, but I wanted more of a scientific. I really wanted the scientific, what we know about the brain, right, is, I don't know, Duncan, if you agree with me, but I believe what we know about the brain is only now beginning. We know more about the brain than we did 10 years ago, but it's only now just beginning. And that's with psychic ability too. Like Duncan and I've talked, we're just now beginning to really understand psychic ability because he'll talk about my brain, he'll talk about Kennan's brain, and basically there's been no research done on anybody like our brains.
I've never seen it.
So Duncan, Kennan did a great job introducing you. Tell them a little bit about you, or let's start out as to what you'd like to start with saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for the introduction, guys, and thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on here. I couldn't hear what Kennan said about me, so forgive me if this is a bit repetitive, but my name's Duncan Hepburn. I'm the owner of the Neural Project. That's theneuralproject.com. You guys want to look us up. And essentially, we're a brain rehabilitation center. We do everything from kind of traditional counseling all the way over to stroke therapy and really kind of neurological based recovery. But we do that in a way that really puts kind of the brain first. So, a lot of people with just mental illnesses or even just normal people that just want to kind of be better. And, they've tried therapy or they've tried the drugs or the supplements and whatever, and they just kind of hit a glass ceiling and they just can't quite get above that. Quite often when we look at the brain, there's a biological reason in there for not being able to get above that. So maybe your dopamine's low, maybe your brain isn't talking to the right areas, so on and so forth. And the way I like to kind of introduce the brain is it's much like muscles in the body, where we all have them, but some are stronger, some are weaker, some look a little funny, so on and so forth. But much like muscles in the body, we can grow them if we kind of work on them specifically. That's just the key, right? Is finding those exercises that work for the brain. So, I've worked with both Chris and Kennan before, and they've got really, really interesting brains. I'm really excited to talk about them and, kind of get into some more of the consciousness around all of our senses, a lot of the things that we don't know about the brain, a lot of the things we don't know about spirituality, stuff like that, where I kind of believe that they're based in the brain and, kind of go from there.
So Duncan, I remember you telling us one time about the default mode of the brain. Could you talk about that a little bit and how that would help other people on the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the default mode network is one of my favorite parts of the brain. And it's comprised of quite a few different areas in the brain, but essentially it's the area that is on when you're at kind of default. So when you're spacing out, watching TV, not really doing anything, it's kind of the default area in the brain that's activated. So it's one of the areas that we use the absolute most every single day. And I like to think of this area like the antenna to consciousness. So if we think about what consciousness is in kind of an abstract term, right? It's like your ability to kind of pick up on the signals out in the world and interpret those into something meaningful, right? So to take it from just, I don't know, this is a feeling and I don't know what's going on with this to, oh, I know what this is. I know how to talk about it. I can communicate that effectively, so on and so forth, that kind of thing. And that's really where a lot of people have trouble because we often feel things, but we don't really know why or how or what's going on there, so on and so forth. So the default mode network is essentially your antenna to the rest of the world, right? And if you increase that, you gain consciousness. You're actually able to then kind of pick up more signals better, make more sense of them, stuff like that. But interestingly enough, the opposite is also true. When it atrophies, you lose consciousness to the point that that actually can lead to a coma. So if we look at comatose patients, whether they're in a vegetative state or minimally conscious state, stuff like that, the one key marker of a coma is basically absence of the default mode network or the default mode network working quite a bit lower than what it ideally should. And again, if we think of consciousness from a spectrum of no consciousness, kind of being unconscious in a coma, that area is really, really offline, all the way towards consciousness being really astounding. That's where we can really pick up on a lot of those signals, pick up on the things that other people might miss.
So how do you build that, Duncan? Or how do you build that?
Yeah, good question. Building it can be a bit of a tricky thing, because it is just kind of a default, right? Um, Meditative practice is a great way to build it. We have a lot of exercises in our clinic here that are really geared towards building that specifically. We do a lot of that remotely via telehealth too. One of my favorite interventions for that is something called neurofeedback, where essentially you listen to your brain waves and then you get to control them over time, which is really cool. Because then not only do you get to, have a better understanding of the default, whatever that is for you, but you actually gain a bit of agency over it as well. So you gain a bit of like an ability to actually control it a little bit. And that's important for a lot of people. And, particularly in the younger generation now, so addicted to phones, so addicted to, video games, all that kind of stuff. Like they have less agency over what their default is. They're almost like running almost like an addict. Like when they get a free moment, their phone's out, they have to, I don't know, you know, crave the addiction kind of thing. So with neurofeedback, you get more of agency over that. So when you're kind of chilling, not doing anything, you can actually then have I want to go do this now, and you can actually do it and not necessarily have to fight some of the psychological processes that would kind of prevent you from doing that. So a great example of this is just like going to the gym. We all think about going to the gym all the time. We rarely get on our running shoes and actually go to the gym kind of thing. Neurofeedback, particularly when it's paired with the default mode network, is one of those areas that it's kind of the difference between like, I want to go to the gym and I'm still on the couch, or I want to go to the gym and then I'm up and actually go into the gym.
So can you share some examples that people could relate to, or obviously you don't want to name patients' names, but some examples of that and how it's helped people?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it pays big dividends just in terms of your daily life. Like you're able to pick up a lot more in terms of conversations, what people are saying, and also what people aren't saying. So we've worked with quite a few CEOs that are, involved in kind of toxic companies, or consultants, again, that will go into these kind of toxic companies and, try to kind of improve them from the ground up. And a lot of time they have trouble just managing the relationships of the owners. And this is something that we probably all face to a certain extent, right? We have problems managing the relationships of our coworkers, our romantic partner, I don't know, somebody who's difficult at the gym, whatever that actually might be. So it's easier to kind of like not get involved with that if that kind of consciousness goes up a lot. So you can like be aware of it, but you don't necessarily have to like eat it too. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're a passive observer, like watching road rage. Somebody else is getting into it, and you're just kind of like entertained by it, if that makes sense. You're not super into it. The other thing that we experience a lot of when we increase the default mode network is just like our awareness of things that, maybe are kind of an unsaid. So in romantic relationships, especially, your partner has a bit of a bad day, right? Which before you may have totally missed that, not been aware of it at all whatsoever. Well, now you're a little bit more sensitive to that. So you can understand that they had a bad day and meet them with a little bit more emotional warmth, a little bit more kindness, stuff like that. So, we see like just the quality of life of people that improve this area go up quite significantly. On kind of more the spiritual side, you are able then to access a whole different realm of stuff that, I can't necessarily talk about where that leads to because it's different for every person. But that's like being aware of the energetic presence, being aware of, spirits, different dimensions, like whatever you want to call it, just kind of the other, if that makes sense. So things that we can't necessarily see or talk about tangibly, it increases your awareness of all those things, which is really quite cool.
So, what area of the brain, Duncan, deals with spirituality? I don't know how to word it, but what area of the brain can people work on, and how would they do it? For instance, I know one of the things you taught me was this exercise right here. I've shared this with people on the show before. What does this do? And
Well, Chris, I can't see your screen, so I can't see
oh,
what.
okay. So I'm doing cross crawls.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep. Yeah. So what cross crawls do, the science behind it is the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So by doing a cross crawl, you're forcing both of those areas to integrate at the same time. And Robert Sperry won the Nobel Prize in the 80s for this work with children, right? And something kind of like crawling. If you look at a baby, they're kind of crunching one side to the other at the same point in time. That's actually forcibly integrating the brain. And it seems really silly. Like it seems like, oh, this is such an easy game. How could that possibly work? How could that possibly have any benefit? But again, Sperry won the Nobel Prize for how much of a profound benefit it actually does. Just like a muscle, you're physically growing that area in the brain, and particularly it's called the corpus callosum, which is like the superhighway that runs between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So left hemisphere, a little more analytical, think like kind of math, logic, reasoning, stuff like that. The right hemisphere, a little bit more emotional, a little bit more abstract, stuff like that. Now, in a lot of science, and a lot of doctors will say, well, you need to grow one and not necessarily the other. Like if you're logical, you need to then be emotional, or vice versa, right? And I disagree with that for the basic premise that it's good to have access to both. Like even if you're an artist, right, you still need to know logically how to plan out a painting, right, or how you're actually going to tackle a problem or something like that. And even if you're a CEO at a super analytical, I don't know, like finance firm or something like that, you still need to be creative about how you're solving problems, how you're approaching your customers, things kind of like that. So really, that superhighway together makes both of those things work together, right? Particularly with spirituality, the right side of the brain feels a little bit more. It's a little bit more kind of emotional, and it's a bit more of like a antenna, if that makes sense. It kind of picks up signals. But the left hemisphere is the one that actually can articulate those into words. So having that superhighway really well connected is the difference between just feeling and not really knowing anything about it, and feeling and being able to talk about it, right? That's one of the main kind of precursors in being able to do so. So yeah, cross crawls are an amazing activity. I really, really like those. Something as simple as exercising too can grow the brain. Like there's all kinds of different games and different interventions that we can do that actually grow the brain. Now back to the original question though, where's spirituality located in the brain? And spirituality is actually a network of different things in the brain. It encompasses things like the emotional areas. It encompasses things like kind of the logical reasoning, executive CEO areas in the front of the brain, language areas as well, kind of more the reptilian, super emotional, not so empathetic stress areas in the brain, things kind of like that. So it's a big network of stuff that actually works together, right? And this is why the brain scans that we do are so cool, because we can actually see that network working together. And much like a cell phone network or internet or something like that, if one of those areas is getting a lesser signal, it's going to be harder for the entire network to work together in synergy. So again, that's the difference between knowing something and being able to articulate it, or trying to think about it and not really being able to, so on and so forth.
What part of the brain was that, Duncan?
It's a whole network of areas. So it extends from the frontal lobe right here, an area called the orbitofrontal cortex, and it goes back through the amygdala, which is the primary stress center in the brain, the cingulate gyrus, the insula, which are kind of more midbrain, brainstem areas. And those encompass a lot of, yeah, just kind of like emotional control, those kind of areas, all the way back to occipital lobe. It's a whole bunch of areas kind of together.
So I'll get back to Kenan and I.
Yeah, please.
And I give you permission, and Kenan gives you permission to talk about us. So, gosh, I don't know, it was about 4 or 5 years ago. So I went and I did all of these tests with Duncan, as Kenan did. And the odd thing is when Duncan came back with the test results, he just kind of said, well, how much LSD do you take every day? And I'm like, what? Why would you ask me that? So Duncan, I'll let you explain that, and then we'll get into Kenan's brain a little bit and how you've helped with that.
Yeah. Yeah, so both Chris and Kenan's brain are unlike anybody that I've seen before or since. Like they're very, very, very unique brains that I was really happy to study and I was happy to look at because it was intellectually quite stimulating for me. Um, and the one main thing that Chris and Kenan have in their brains that's really unique and really just not like most other people is this thing that we call retrograde transmission. So, we all know about neurotransmitters, right? That's dopamine, serotonin, the chemical transmission, stuff like that, right? And that typically fires in a linear fashion. So the signal comes in this end, it shoots down the neuron, and then fires out more chemicals in that end there. But we do have a little bit of neurotransmission that occurs the other way. We call it retrograde, kind of like retro, backwards, that kind of thing, where gases actually go, like something like nitric oxide, go into the opposite end, like the terminal station of the neuron, and then they kind of shoot backwards. Now, this is a really good thing for the brain because it's kind of relaxing to the neuron, right? It's almost like you have a muscle flexed all the time and you're kind of letting it relax a little bit. But this is largely associated with drug trips. So, LSD triggers this like crazy, so does magic mushrooms. The one kind of more common one that triggers it to a lesser extent is marijuana. You have a lot more retrograde transmission occurring when you take any of these substances at all. And Chris and Kenan just have really, really remarkable rates of retrograde transmission. And again, they're doing that without the use of drugs, which is really quite interesting. And again, it's not localized in the areas the drugs are. So I don't want you guys to think that like Chris and Kenan have an LSD kind of brain. Like they have a mechanism that's working almost the same way as that, but it's not causing like the same effects. So they're not seeing the world with a whole bunch of dragons flying out all the time. But it's just a really, really remarkable thing, and I've never seen it before nor since.
So, and then Duncan, you were going to talk a little bit about like brain damage and how you've been able to help with that, like with Kenan, with stroke victims, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so Kenan had a fairly significant amount of brain damage, and it was kind of diffuse. It was across the entire cortex, not really localized in one area. But the way I like to, introduce it and the way I like people to think about it is the brain is very much like muscles in our body that can get damaged over time. They can get damaged with stress. They can get damaged with drug abuse. They can get damaged with all sorts of different things, right? Now, the brain is a lot more sensitive to some things than others, right? So the body, if you hit me really hard in the chest, there would be a bit of a consequence to that. The brain is actually fairly sturdy when it comes to physical impacts. So obviously, if you have a car crash, that's a bit of a crazy one, but most of the time, just kind of hitting your head, it's pretty well protected. But that being said, much like muscles get damaged, the brain can too, across a whole bunch of different areas, whether that's with stress or with physical injury. And much like muscles, there has to be a little bit of a repair mechanism to actually occur for that to happen, for you to get back to kind of 100%. So in Kenan's case, and this is the case with so many people, he had this damage occur years ago, like long, long, long time ago, and then it just never went here, right? So again, because we can't see the brain like we can see muscles or bones in the body, so many people, when they have any type of injury or any type of damage at all, they just throw their hands up and they don't really know what to do about it, and they think it's just going to work themselves out, right? And to a certain extent, it kind of can, but that's almost like I'm breaking a bone and then I'm just kind of leaving it, like I'm not really getting it set back in place properly. So, it probably will be fine over time, but it might just kind of bug you. It might not feel right, stuff like that. And later on in life, it might cause some more significant problems. So much like that, we just need to kind of repair what hasn't been repaired before, right? Um, so in that case, we brought Kenan into the clinic and we did a full neurological exam. We call it the neural assessment, and we basically analyzed every area in the brain on kind of a macro scale first. So if an area was fine, great, we move on to the next area. And we're basically just looking for that damage. As soon as we find that damage, we kind of narrow in on it. And then we create a personalized intervention program for Kenan. We do that with all of our clients. And we essentially just tackled those areas. So, for example, one of the things that we gave Kenan was the cross crawls, just those crossing techniques there to grow that area in the middle. And we've got tons and tons of games like that. Tons of really easy interventions. It's not a really scary thing to just, again, help put the muscle back where it should be, right? Um, Now, the difference between what we do in our clinic and what a lot of people kind of their approach is we have a very, very targeted approach. So we'll look at like the 10 areas that are really causing damage, and we'll really narrow in on those and give intervention specific for that. So that's kind of like if my bicep hurts, then let's focus on the bicep, not my whole upper body, right? And a lot of clinics, whether it's Mayo Clinic or Barrow or any kind of big names, they just kind of throw the book at you, right? And you end up working out your entire upper body, not the area that really needs attention. So, Kenan responded incredibly well to the treatment too. So we kind of expected him to be with us for, that period of time. And he ended up being with us like much, much, much longer than that. And that's not too odd of a thing to actually occur. But yeah, really cool working with his brain.
Awesome. So, can you work with people that are not in the Scottsdale, Phoenix area? Can you hear me okay?
I can't hear you there, Chris.
Can you work with people that are not in the Scottsdale area?
Yeah, absolutely can. So I'd say about 30% of my clientele right now is on telehealth of some sort. There are certain conditions that I can't, but the vast majority of them I can. So certain like really extreme conditions, like really bad Parkinson's or really bad stroke, stuff like that, that does require more of like an inpatient treatment. But beyond that, I mean, 90% of the conditions out there, we can definitely do that. I also travel to go work with clients. So I've been to, I think, 19 different countries around the world, just working with them alone. And I've done work with like the special forces. I did a PTSD program for them, SWAT teams around the country. I did the personal protection for a head of state. I can't name it, but one of the countries in Asia, he was equivalent to like the prime minister there. And I did like a whole PTSD program for him as well. So, and all of his bodyguards and stuff like that. So I'm very mobile. I'm very open to working with anybody from anywhere in the world.
So, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. How do you, as a scientist, as a neuroscientist, correlate? Because you and I have known each other for a long time. Like I've sent you clients, I've sent you people. You've actually. Would you mind telling me about the Green Man?
Yeah, so Chris did a reading for me. And this would have been about the same time I did your brain scan. So, I want to say about 4 years ago. Does that kind of sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he pulled out a whole bunch of these cards, and the one that stuck out was the Green Man, and it was this little, as you guys have probably seen in the show, kind of guy popping out of the shadows, popping out of the tree or something like that. And he was talking about it, and as he was explaining it, I was like, oh my God, I've so seen this guy before a couple times. And I pulled out my phone, and I remember seeing like this little dot with a face on it. And I remember seeing this like maybe a year and a half before Chris and I ever did a reading together. And I remember I was up in Canada, where I'm originally from, and I took a beautiful photo of a sunset. And like under the dock, there's this little green dot with a face on it. And I went, that is like so weird, because it's like not like a lens flare. It's not just like the reflection of the sunset, something like that. It's just this like weird green dot in the area, not any trees around, but it super has a face on it, like 100% has a face on it. And I just went like, I don't know what the hell that is. And I kind of just chalked it up as like, okay, well, whatever, for a couple of years. But when Chris was explaining that, I went, oh my God, this is crazy. I've totally seen that guy before, and he's in a couple photos since. So, I showed Chris at the time, and I showed him like, this is the face, check it out. And it was undoubtedly like, this little green man there. So it was quite a crazy coincidence there.
Yeah, it was amazing. I remember you showing me at least 3 or 4 pictures of that.
Yeah.
So how do you correlate that, Duncan? I mean, there's a lot of undiscovered areas of the brain. I'm so impressed with how much you stay on top of it, the new discoveries. By the way, Melinda, you mentioned on the show that now everybody wants to go get a brain scan. This is not, and I know with Duncan that can include like a brain scan, like a what do you call them, Duncan?
Neural assessments.
MRI.
Yep, MRIs and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ken and I didn't do an MRI. He has this battery of tests. Now, the first time I did this, I don't know, it's about an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours long. It's quite extensive. And he can tell where your brain is at from these tests. Well, I remember getting like 30 minutes into it, and I was completely maxed. I was getting angry. I was getting frustrated. Can you explain that, Duncan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's many different ways to scan the brain, right? And we do MRIs at the clinic. Not at our clinic here. We don't have an MRI, but that is something that we will recommend to patients, and we have a center that people can do that with. A lot of times we don't need something that crazy of a scan. So, what I always recommend to patients is even if you don't seek treatment with us, just talk to us to begin with, and just let's see where the best path is for you, if that makes sense. So an MRI is really high def, which is good, but the problem is it only shows structure in the brain. So it doesn't show connections. So kind of think is your bicep at your elbow, or is it connected to your wrist? That kind of thing, right? And it also doesn't show function. So is it functioning at 10%, 100%? We don't really know. So your brain can look fine, much like your body can look fine. You don't have necessarily a broken bone, but you could still be having pain in that area, right? And an MRI won't necessarily pick that up. There are other techniques that will pick that up, and at our clinic we kind of just pick the techniques that work for the patient. So it's very personalized medicine. Our whole procedure is kind of starting at a 30,000-foot view, scanning every area of the brain, and if we don't see any problems, great, moving on. Those are the areas that we don't need to work on. Totally fine, no pain in those joints, type thing.
But why was I getting really upset? Why was I getting? You would hit on something, I would get. And same with Kenan, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, when we look at the areas that do have damage, or do have something, we zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And the way that we do that is basically by testing those areas a lot, right? So we do a lot of different interventions with them, a lot of different tests, so we can really figure out exactly what's going on in that area. So kind of think of that you're at the gym and you're lifting easy weights, and then they get heavier and heavier and heavier. And the areas that we really want to focus on, those are heavy. We're going to max you out in those kind of areas. And particularly with Chris and Kenan, because their brains were so unique, we touched on a lot of the emotional areas, and we maxed those out. So, hey, when your emotions get maxed, what do you end up feeling, right? You end up feeling a little bit of distress. You end up feeling a little, maybe some of those emotions kind of come out a little bit, right? Now, I want to just make clear that, I don't think that Chris was in distress. I don't think that he was in, a horrible state there at all. Obviously, we have a very safe clinic and very safe technicians here. But it can kind of bring those areas up almost as if you're poking the brain. So a really cool example of this, and you can find these videos on YouTube. There's an area in the brain called the fusiform face gyrus, FFA. And what they do in some types of brain studies or some strokes, they actually put a little electrode on that area and they stimulate it. So kind of think of it like a little vibrator on that area of the brain. It's very rarely done. I think it's maybe only been done 20 times. For other, seizure reasons or something like that. But when they do that, a whole bunch of faces pop up and it's crazy, and the people just experience this wild trip, right? Totally wild trip, despite the fact that there's no drugs involved, just a little vibrator kind of thing on the brain. And that's kind of what happens, right? We're stimulating the area in the brain, and therefore you get to see what that area does, right? So in Chris and Kenan's, instance, right, those stress areas in the brain, for example, when they were stimulated, it really ramped them up, really 100%, and they got kind of anxious, agitated, stuff like that. That's a really good signal, right? Because at that point in time, we have to look at that area and we go, well, there's a lot of things that can stress you out. We need a better way of coping with this. We need a better, stronger mechanism in the brain, so when something activates you, you're not totally at the effect of it. right? So then you can actually have some kind of cognitive control to kind of counteract that stress component in the brain. So that's kind of why that happens. And I'll say again, the brain is such a new, interesting thing. Like we really, really don't know about most of it. It's kind of like the ocean, right? Where we know so much about the ocean, and yet we've only explored like I think 2% of the ocean, right? So the brain is very much the same way, where we're just at the cusp of kind of exploring a lot of what it does, what it means, how that correlates to our life, stuff like that.
And so, Duncan, this cross crawl, right? I want to encourage everybody, if you're just joining the show, simply please do this, because after I did that first test and I got maxed out after about 20 minutes, then I worked with Duncan doing very similar exercises, crossing the left and right hemisphere, doing several other exercises with him, training with him. So then about a month later, I took the same type of exam. I don't want to call it exam, but I took the same type of exercise, and I didn't get maxed. I was like, oh my God, and I totally noticed it. So when the brain is more relaxed, you're actually more open to awarenesses around you. So I want to talk a little bit about right now, Duncan, we only have 5 senses, right?
I was hoping you would bring that up. Well, no, I mean, obviously not, right? We've got 5 sensory senses, right? So again, smelling, tasting, touching, stuff like that. But I mean, I'd just like everybody to kind of guess how many senses we have, right? I love to kind of ask that question. Most people, when it's, well, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8, whatever. We've got at least 23 or 24. 23 or 24. Now, when I started university, that number was 15. And if I went up to my professor and I said, hey, we're going to find 20 one day, he would have just, you're failing the class for sure, buddy, right? No way. But we probably have hundreds of senses, like if not even thousands of senses. We can only detect 24 in the brain. So one of the most recent technological revolutions that happened just a couple years ago was our ability to detect gravitational waves, right? That technology just came out, in astronomy. And with that, we were able to detect the gravitational waves in the brain. So our brain has a sensor for gravitational waves. How crazy is that? And we can actually see it all over the world. When a solar flare goes off in the sun, you can watch this on traffic cameras everywhere in the world. Everybody goes inside. In Tokyo, at the same time as New York, at the same time as South Africa, people end up getting a coffee inside. Or, hey, let's just pop into this store here real quick, something like that. Your brain literally senses that gravitational wave going off and sends you to safety so you don't get pulsed with that radiation flare. How crazy is that? And we have all kinds of senses like this that, I mean, I'm sure we're not aware, right? And we really have no idea what they are, what they do, how to study them, or even how people interact with them, stuff like that. But again, we can see it on a brain scanner. When a solar flare goes off, or a big gravitational wave hits us, our brain registers that. Like we actually see a spike in activity in a certain area in our brain, the parietal lobe right about here, that corresponds to that. And this brings up to another point with Chris's kind of activation and his kind of anger a little bit. I mean, anger is maybe a really strong word for that. So frustration maybe during the test. You only have so much cognitive capacity. Your brain can only handle so much stuff at a time. Like think like a computer. You can have so many tabs open, but you can't have more or otherwise everything starts slowing down. And a lot of things in life are really competitive with things we kind of want to be doing in life, right? So it's a classic example. If you're super stressed out all the time, how are you ever going to have a super successful relationship or run a super successful company or run whatever great thing you want to do? There's a lot of truth to that, because you're spending a lot of mental energy doing this stressful thing, and not focusing on your senses, not focusing on consciousness, things like that. And we can literally see it in the brain. When the stress center gets activated, that default mode network, that area that, again, is really aware of everything in the brain, goes down, right? So it really, really benefits everybody to, get a brain scan done or have some sort of testing and some sort of, increase in coping mechanisms there. So you have more cognitive capacity to do what you want to do, right? Like live your life as it should be, really achieve a lot. Achievement happens in the default mode network. It happens when you're actually fully, invested whatever cognitive energy you have in what you're doing. Does not happen when you're invested in stress at all whatsoever. And I think, Chris, you can speak to this. Just how much stress people have just running in the background all the time is insane, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I wanted you to touch on. Thank you for sharing that, because people go, well, how can I increase my psychic ability? Well, if you're at cognitive capacity, right, you can barely function talking to anyone on the phone, let alone from the other side.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely. People think of stress as like this is a 2 out of 10, this is a 10 out of 10, whatever. There's lots of levels in it, and that's not true. In the brain, stress is on or off. It's all the way on or it's all the way off in the brain, right? So I mean, just think about like the stress you have at your job, right? Your brain interprets that the same as if there was a bear in the room trying to eat you, right? Well, okay, so you're at work for 8 hours a day. If I ran from a bear for 8 hours and then I came down, sat on the couch, and said I'm exhausted, everybody would be like, "Oh, well, yeah, of course you're exhausted. Like, no kidding." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we function under that stress at work. We come and we sit on the couch, and then we go, "Why am I tired?" We don't really understand why, right? Now, the reason why that feels different in the brain is the frontal lobe right here. That's kind of like the soothing mother. That's the area that goes, "Hey, calm down. It's okay. Relax," that kind of area. And when we're not under physical danger, that area picks up a little bit more and kind of calms us down, right? But again, that's a complicated, taxing neurological process. You're using a lot of different, parts in the brain all at once, all that kind of stuff, just to kind of keep the stress at bay. So, think of this like if you're lifting weights and on a balance board and juggling at the same time, like how much weights can you lift, compared to if you're just spending 100% of your energy lifting the weight, you can do a lot better there.
Excellent. So, what is the most tell us about some of the most rewarding experiences you've had, or just one rewarding experience working with people.
Yeah, I've had so many, Chris. It's so hard to pick it out. And, this is the thing that I love about my job so much is I get to meet so many amazing people, and I feel as if I do such good work with them. I had a client came in a couple years ago who had a really, really massive stroke. He had Bell's palsy. So he essentially couldn't move the right side of his body at all, to the point that his face was drooping, his eye was drooping, he would drool out of the right side of his face, could barely use his hand. Like, and when it happened, it had a really big tremor, stuff like that. And 3 or 4 months later, he sent me a video of him playing tennis, like truly playing tennis with both hands, right? And I mean, that stuff is just, it's incredible to feel just such gratitude. Um, and really to get somebody's life back on track like that. But I've had so many cases of people who, don't have a problem per se, right? That just feel better at the end of treatment. Like, for example, I was working with a kid that lives in Oklahoma just on Sunday. And, he's had this really critical voice inside of his head forever, right? Like something that just beats him up every time he fails. It's just there to criticize him. And it's a really kind of horrible thing that he lives with. Doesn't let him experience success, always tears him down. Like grades are never good enough. Sports are never good enough. The girlfriend's never good enough. I mean, just is really, really, really angry at him kind of thing. And again, this is his own critical voice that's just horrible to live with. And we gave him a bunch of strategies to kind of lessen that and to actually then focus on some kind of self-compassion and actually grow self-compassion inside the brain so he can just be kinder to himself. And that's already made a really big difference. Like he was able to actually go to work, and he has a cold calling job right now, right? And so oftentimes people are calling him and saying just, "Hey, go away. I don't want to deal with you, screw you," stuff like that. They're kind of harsh. And when he would experience that, obviously that criticism would just eat him alive. And it went from eating him alive to now he can just call people, right? And he can actually do his job, and he doesn't feel bad about it too. So, a lot of what I do, it's not necessarily repairing a ton of damage. It's just getting people functioning a bit better, right? And whether that's in the brain, emotionally, a little bit of both, that kind of thing. I'm a big proponent that I think we all deserve to function at our best, and we all deserve to function really well and see what that's like. I think we're all at risk of living a really mediocre life where we don't actually get to see our true potential I think that's kind of sad. And I would really like everybody to see their true potential, to see what they're capable of, and see how happy that's going to make them.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, like doing the cross crawls, right? If you go back and forth, I can't emphasize that enough. It's probably the easiest thing I can show you all to do right now over the show. One woman told me she would just put a marker above her doorway, and every time she would cross between the bedroom and the kitchen, she would do 100 cross crawls, right? Does that help emotionally? What part of the brain does that help?
Yeah, so again, that's that superhighway, that corpus callosum right in the middle. That will have a bit of a benefit emotionally. Really, that just lets you get access to more of your brain. So even when you're dealing with logical problems, you get to do it in a way that's really kind of creative, right? You get access to that other kind of component in the brain. When you're dealing with something really emotional or really abstract, you're able then to articulate that, to kind of think about it in a logical way, which really helps. That takes those distressing emotions from being, I'm distressed, I don't know what I'm doing, this is just kind of rough, I don't know how I feel, to, oh, I know how I feel, what caused this, what I have to do about it, blah, blah, blah. And that may not make the distress go away entirely, but at least then you have a blueprint, like a plan to actually, help with that. But yeah, cross calls are the easiest thing that I can show you guys for sure. And they're one of just the best activities you can do. You need to do three to get a benefit. So 1, 2, 3, that's it, and you get a benefit. And the more the merrier. So if you want to do them half an hour a day, you want to do them, 5 hours a day, even better kind of thing. But make it into a habit. So every morning when I wake up, I walk to the kitchen and I do the cross crawls when I'm walking to the kitchen, take a break for a little bit, and then when I'm cooking food in the morning, I'm watching the stove doing cross crawls, right? You don't need to do anything in particular. It doesn't need to be like a dedicated exercise. You could be watching TV, you could be, I don't know, whatever you're doing, mouthwash at night before you go to bed, something like that. Just the more the merrier on that. And, really just try to make it a habit so you can actually get the benefit of that for a while. Much like kind of growing muscles in the body, it happens kind of slow, 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 and then all at once, right? So if I'm trying to get a six pack, I'm doing better, I'm doing better, I'm doing better, I'm lifting heavier weights, I'm not really seeing it. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I got abs, right? I'm feeling like a lot better. And you get the benefit of that. So I tell people, stick with it for 2 or 3 months, like dedicate the practice. And much like going to the gym, it's like you're going to dedicate 2 or 3 months to it and see how it goes. Kind of do the same thing with cross crawls and just, see the benefit. Like I'm sure you all are going to feel a lot better and be more creative, be more logical in the ways that really benefit you and kind of serve you well.
So Duncan, in your scientific brain, are there synchronistic events? How do you feel about the brain creating or us creating synchronistic events in our lives? What do you correlate that with?
What do you mean by synchronistic events?
Well, for instance, me telling you about the Green Man and then you pulling out your camera and showing me pictures of the Green Man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think the brain creates that to a certain extent. The brain certainly recognizes it, right? I think the recognition component of that is really important, right? Obviously there's lots of signs of things every single day that people miss. People miss the stock market boom, people miss the Bitcoin boom, people miss all that kind of stuff, despite the signals that are clearly pointing towards this is going up type thing, right? So really by working the brain, you're able just to recognize more. It's like your antenna is much, much, much larger, and therefore you can pick up on more signals. Now, much like a radio, you don't have to listen to every signal out there. You can tune in one at a time kind of thing, or turn it off if you decide to, right? But a small antenna and a bad radio signal doesn't actually help you, right? Having more access to more in the brain really, I think, is going to improve everybody's life. And again, it just gives you the option for that, right? So I think the brain definitely recognizes these things. And, again, I think there's so much that happens in the world and outside of it that we just can't explain, right? That are just these, crazy correlations. And I think it'd be hard to argue that they don't exist. But as to what those mean, I think, that's up to interpretation for everybody individually.
Well, when you started, school, there were 15 discovered senses, and then when you graduated, there were 23, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So just in that really short period of time, they discovered 8 more scientifically based principles. So I think that we're going to be finding more. And I think I really love so much you being on the show and combining this scientific and what we've discovered about the brain with these spiritual gifts, because I really feel there's quite a few new people on the show tonight, but many of the people that have been here for a while I know are very gifted, and this has helped so much. Hopefully it has. If you can give us some feedback, that helps to uncover more of your gifts. I think that is what's really vital, and building the doorknobs in your brain so that you're less stressed, that you are increasing your cognitive capacity. And Duncan is a master. He can do some of the work that he does on Zoom, right?
Yeah, quite a lot of it.
Quite a lot of it. So you can contact him at theneuroproject.com. Kenan, if you would retype that in there for me, please, that would be awesome. And if any of you have any comments, now is the time to ask. We'll do the show on Sunday. You know, for those of you that have a subscription, for the monthly subscription, I'll definitely pull another card for you on Sunday. But I just think this has been invaluable. And do you have anything else to add, Duncan, or that you would conclude with that you feel is important?
Yeah, well, I think your point, we started with 15 senses, now we're at 23, 24. A lot of what we were finding in the brain now mirrors what old religion, like the Vedas, the ancestral Buddhists, the Hindus, like they've known forever, and they've been in their religious scripture and stuff like that. Things like mindfulness meditation, happiness practices, gratitude journals, all this kind of stuff. We see that it's working in the brain. We have brain areas that are actually wired for it. So for example, there's a gratitude pathway in the brain. We literally have roads already built in that we're born with for those kind of things. And, they talked about that a lot in really ancient religions. They also talked about a lot more in ancient religions that we haven't yet discovered in the brain, right? So I just think that it's, a really kind of cool correlation between those things. And I think, again, at some level, people know, right? Just because we can't, put a brain scan behind that yet, it doesn't mean it necessarily exists. And when we do, then there's traction with it, right? I'd say just work on growing your antenna. And I encourage every one of you to contact me. I'd love to have a conversation at the very least. And, if there's anything else I can do, any questions, shoot me an email, give me a call, send me a text, something like that. My number and everything, contact info is on my website, theneuroproject.com. And, just thanks so much for having me, Chris and Kenan. This has been lovely for me too.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. I really appreciate you. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all for watching this. We'll do the show again Sunday night at 6 p.m. For those of you that are new, I do readings for you, and I'll be able to tune in then. So please come back. Please join us. Please reach out to Duncan. Amazing person. Love you all. Have a great, great night.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, so much. Have a good one. Yeah, I'm really happy about that. That was great. Okay, awesome. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sending me the link, I'd like that. That'd be great.